Howdy, boys and girls. Welcome to another session of Lectures by Lobezi. Only this isn't lectures. This is me going over the study guide. So because of the coronavirus and whatnot, haven't had any contact with the students. Perhaps you are, missing Lobezi or whatnot. I mean, I can imagine that. I would assume that's to be expected. However, I wanted to just go over the study guide that the last one that we did with you guys. This is just my feedback. I posted this on my Google Classroom page. Hopefully you looked at it, but it just might be a good idea if we went through this. So I'll kind of go through these questions quickly. But I'll read over them and then kind of read through the responses and answer anything that sort of needs to be. Okay. So, question number 1 says, how was Louis Napoleon Bonaparte able to be elected president? What led him to stage a coup? And then how was he legitimized? All right. So, I guess the way that to best answer this is that he was elected because of who his uncle was, and obviously Napoleon Bonaparte. So he had a very famous name, so that that name recognition helped. But people were really tired after the revolutions of 1830 and 1848. They were tired of just the unrest associated with those revolutions, and so they were looking for somebody who could provide stability, and so a strong president, which he promised to be, was what they wanted. Somebody that could provide order and stability. But he also was a pretty good politician in that he promised a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So that's something we see today with modern politicians. He staged a coup d'etat because they wouldn't let him, because of the Constitution, serve a second term as president, and they weren't willing to amend it, meaning the legislature. So he perpetrated that coup d'etat. And then what gave him legitimacy was there was a plebiscite using universal male suffrage, and then well over 90% of the voters returned, and they approved of his seizing power. So that is what legitimized what he did. It says, list Napoleon III's accomplishments and failures as Emperor of France. So he's really kind of credited with large-scale industrialization of France. Now, it was kind of happening, but it really couldn't take place until after the Napoleonic Wars were over. So that's just a good way for you to kind of think that, most of continental Europe did not begin industrializing because of all the Napoleonic Wars. So really not until about 1815 do we see large-scale industrialization, but it's not until his reign that France goes through it. He appointed that guy George Haussmann to rebuild Paris, so that was a noteworthy accomplishment. Ferdinand de Lesseps completes the Suez Canal, 1867. Let's see, it says labor unions were granted the right to strike. He also had success, his country did, in fighting the Crimean War, and so that gives him more credibility as a world leader. Okay, so France, after that, is that victory there kind of sees its place restored as one of the most influential continental powers. But he had some failures with interfering in Mexican politics, huge embarrassment for France, and then probably the biggest was. So not only was he captured, but Paris was surrounded and laid siege to. So they had a foreign power there, and actually Kaiser Wilhelm I was crowned the Kaiser Emperor of Germany in the Hall of Mirrors out at the Palace of Versailles. Okay, let's go down here. Next question, number 3. Use map in your notes to identify urban planning improvements made to Paris after 1850. Who developed the plan? Explain other countries, or how other countries were affected by the redesign. All right, so basically they destroyed all of the older styled buildings that had a lot of narrow alleyways, and they were replaced with, modern, I guess, more modern buildings, but they were replaced also with broad, straightened boulevards, tree-lined boulevards. Now that adds to the sort of scenic beauty, I guess, of Paris, but also serves a practical purpose. So would-be revolutionists couldn't, easily create the barricades that they had done so in 1830 and 1848. All right, and then there are just a lot of improvements as far as sewage goes, and there's sewers, more hygiene, or more sanitation, excuse me. And then what else? They have parks and things like that. They have a zoo. So there's all of these cultural features that sort of make the city much more livable. All right. Other countries, we see Vienna and Cologne or other cities sort of copy this. And so that kind of becomes an example to the rest of the world. All right. Moving on, question number 4 says, what new feature can be seen in this photo after Paris was rebuilt? Yeah, I already kind of addressed that, but these are the straight tree-lined boulevards. Okay, so it would be very difficult for revolutionaries to erect barricades to fight off the military, and so this serves a practical purpose to prevent revolutions. Okay, so keep going. Number 5, it says, according to the notes, what was the cause of the Crimean War? Why did France and Great Britain enter the conflict? Okay, so Russia was really attempting to expand its reach into the Mediterranean Sea, and in order for them to be able to do so, they would need to move through this area here, which is the Bosporus Straits, all right, and then down here to what is called the Dardanelles. But anyway, this is controlled by the Ottoman Empire, and so, for them, actually it's Istanbul, not Constantinople. But at any rate, the Russians basically use as an excuse for them to declare war that there were Christian shrines in Palestine that were not protected, that the French were protecting them, but they were protecting sort of Catholic shrines, but the Russians wanted to protect Orthodox shrines, and since they weren't given permission to do so, they occupied these Danubian principalities. So this is like the Danube River and where it empties into the Black Sea. So they occupied, I think, Wallachia, and then I can't remember the name of the other territory. But anyway, the Ottomans declare war, and so the French and the British, even though they're sort of allies, right, because of the concert of Europe, they don't want Russia to become too strong because that would upset the balance of power, and so they declare war on Russia, okay? And they side with a Muslim country, which was sort of seen as very unusual to do, okay? So here is an excerpt here. Let me go down a little bit. A little less. Well, whatever. Anyway, it says, we have no room for corpses in the wards, not a sponge, nor a rag of linen, nor anything have I left. These poor fellows have not had a clean shirt, nor been washed for 2 months before they came here. I hope in a few days we shall establish a little cleanliness. It says, what is historically significant about the lady with the lamp? So this is Florence Nightingale, and so she served as a nurse for the British during the Crimean War, and we know that there were a significant number of the deaths that were due to people who sort of died from hospital-related diseases because of lack of sanitation and hygiene. And so she just sort of implements some standards for cleanliness in those surgery wards, and that helps. After the war is over, she goes back to England, and then she establishes a nursing school, and that becomes a path, an economic path for middle-class women. All right. All right, if we go down, number 7, what is this excerpt? Based on it in the notes, what general message does it convey? It says, for the Light Brigade, was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew. Somewhat had blundered. There's not to make reply, there's not to reason why, there's but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. All right, so this is from Alfred Tennyson's The Charge of the Light Brigade. Pretty famous poem. There's a lot of romantic elements to it, and I say that because it sort of glorifies war, but it shows, which is evidence that there were, I guess, poor decisions made by the officers during this war, and this is just one example. All the 600 died, and but it also sort of alludes to, and that's the romantic feature of it, that it alludes to the bravery that the men had. That they didn't question the orders that were given to them; they just followed them. So, but a pretty famous piece of literature there. So what was the outcome of the war, including the major effects of the conflict? Okay, so Russia swiftly defeated, revealing how economically backwards they were. We'll talk about that later. It led Russia to reform itself, destroy the concert of Europe. That's super important. And then that's going to allow both Italy and Germany to unify as a result of that. Okay, so that means because there's nobody that can maintain the status quo, all right? And so the nationalists inside the Italian peninsula and the German states can unify. And France emerges as a continental leader once again. What steps did Camillo Cavour take to strengthen Piedmont, Sardinia, so that it could lead Italian unification? All right, so this guy is he's a conservative, but he's a follower of Realpolitik, just like Otto von Bismarck, which we'll discuss next. But he saw that as the new prime minister, that unification would economically benefit Piedmont, but it would also make the monarchy stronger. Okay, so he uses nationalism as a way to strengthen the power of the monarchy. But in order to do that, they're going to need to build their army up, and the way to pay for an army is through increased tax revenue. And the best way to get more tax revenue is to industrialize. All right, so they sort of facilitate that, help build railroads, etc. And then they build a strong military. And then the next thing he does, because he knew they're going to have to take on Austria to take land, and so Piedmont, Sardinia is not large enough or powerful enough themselves to defeat the Austrians, and so he forges an alliance with Napoleon III of France. Okay. Number 10, it says use your notes and map to answer the following. What territories did Cavour gain by allying with France? What territories did he have to cede to France? Okay, so he gets directly Lombardy, but France pulls out before Austria is defeated, but he's able to get the territories of Parma, Modena, Tuscany, and Romagna, because they basically left Austria, and then through plebiscites. But in return for the territory that they were able to gain, they had to give France Nice and Savoy, which right here and here, so that they would lose that. That would go to France for territory. All right, and so he's responsible through those actions for unifying the northern half. It says, what role did Garibaldi play in Italian unification? So he fought alongside Cavour, Giuseppe Garibaldi. But he decided that he wanted to go and liberate the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, and so he left. And actually, Cavour sort of encouraged him because he thought, that he wouldn't have success, that he and his 1,000 followers, known as the Red Shirts, would be unsuccessful. And the reason why he wanted him to be unsuccessful was because he didn't like that Garibaldi was a Republican, meaning he wanted a republic, which would not bode well for the monarchy, because with a republic you can't have a king, right? You got to have a president or something like that, so or prime minister. So he sort of encouraged him to go, not thinking that he would have success, and he did. He was able to sort of rally the local people to rise up against the Bourbons, who held onto the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. And then he was threatening to march on Rome, and So Cavour goes down there with his military and like kind of bypasses Rome and meets Garibaldi and would go to war with him if necessary, because he doesn't want him to attack Rome, because if he attacks Rome, the French are going to come in and everything that they've done or succeeded in doing would be sort of for nothing, because it would be destroyed. So he was prepared to fight Garibaldi, but Garibaldi stepped down, or sort of stood down rather, and then what we see as a result is the southern half and the northern half united in 1861, and we have unified Italy. All right, it says which two territories were not part of it in 1861. Venezia and Rome, okay, are the two areas that are not right up there where Venice is. That's in Venezia, and then Rome. And so they get Venezia by kind of staying out of the Austro-Prussian, or helping the Prussians against the Austrians. And then Rome was gained after France is defeated in the Franco-Prussian War, and they didn't get involved. So Prussia gave them Rome because they stayed out of the war. All right, and so the French were forced to leave Rome, the French soldiers, and then they were able to annex it. Okay, so let's move on to the next topic, which is going to be German unification. It says Germany is not looking to Prussia's liberalism, but to her power. The great question of the day will not be decided by speeches and majority decisions. That was the mistake of 1848 and 1849, but by iron and blood. Okay, so the mistake of 1848 and 1849, that was the attempt by the attempt to create a unified Germany, which was unsuccessful. So he says, it says, how does this quote reveal his strategy for winning support of the conservative monarchy? Why did Bismarck, a conservative, embrace nationalism, and how did Bismarck demonstrate realpolitik through the unification of Germany? Okay, so it says that Bismarck is basically telling the people that the reason why everybody looks to Prussia, all the Germanic states look to Prussia for leadership, is not because of their liberalism. So, that should be something that the members of their parliament, the German or the Prussian parliament, shouldn't sort of be too proud of themselves. All right, that's not why people are looking to Prussia. They're looking to Prussia because Prussia is the strongest Germanic state there is, and so they're looking to its ability to make and win war. Okay, so blood and iron is through war. All right, and so that's how the decisions need to be made. That's how they're going to create a unified Germany. It's going to be through war. It's not going to be through voting, which was what they attempted before. Anyway, he embraces nationalism, even though he's a strict conservative, because he sees it as a way. I mean, he's an opportunist. Okay, and so he sees it as a way to bring about the strengthening of the Prussian or German monarchy, just like Cavour did with Italy. All right, so he's just sort of kind of co-opting nationalism because it's going to be beneficial for him to do so. All right, and that rallies the people. Nationalistic wars really force people to kind of rally around the flag and their leaders, and so that really helps strengthen him. So realpolitik is basically, it's sort of like the Prince, Machiavelli's The Prince, but more dealing with like foreign policy. So essentially just do whatever you have to do if it's in the best interest of the state. We could also say it's similar to what the French did under Cardinal Richelieu. That was, can't think of the term, it'll come to me in just a second. But it's very similar to that, like you do what is in the best interest of the state. And if you have to, form new alliances, fine. If you have to break alliances, if you have to use war, if you have to do some like underhanded things, then that's fine. You do it because that's what's raison d'etat. Sorry, I knew I would remember it. It just took a second. All right. Anyway, that was what Ricky Lee used, raison d'etat. So it's very similar to realpolitik. And then the Maria Theresa used it too. that form of after we have the War of Austrian Succession into the 7 Years' War, when she changes alliances. She's allied first with Great Britain, and then she forms an alliance with diplomatic revolution, right? Because she forms an alliance with their old enemy, the French. Okay, and so that just means you got to be flexible, right? As a leader. So realpolitik is just another example of that. All right. Anyway, number 14, identify the weapon to the left and explain its usefulness to the Prussians in war. This is a breech loading gun. Breech loading. What does that mean? It means in the back, in the rear. Anyway, it's more accurate, and it's a better, superior weapon to what the Austrians used, which were muzzle loaders. Muzzle loaders take longer to load. They're not as accurate, and you can't fire them and reload them while lying down, which you can do with a breech. And that was one of the things that helped them. They also had railroads, which they could really reposition troops, or remobilize troops very quickly using their advanced railroad system, which the Austrians did not have, right? Because they were not a part of that customs union that was formed. All right, it says list the territories that Prussia gained through quote-unquote blood and iron. The Danish-Prussian War, they got Schleswig and Holstein. The Austro-Prussian War, they got Hanover, Nassau, and Hesse-Kassel. I'm not 100% on that pronunciation. And then after the Franco-Prussian War, they got Alsace and Lorraine from France, and then the southern German states sort of joined forces with them, Bavaria, Württemberg, two of the larger ones of the south. So that's how in 1871 this becomes Germany. All of this becomes Germany. All right, so Prussia is responsible for that, 1871. Okay. Describe the differences that existed in the United States during the mid-19th century. How did the nation remedy the differences? So the U.S. suffered from regionalism, where we have the North and the South is different because it's an agrarian-based economy dependent on slave labor, and it's divided from the North, which is an agricultural economy. Which was not an agricultural, it was an industrial economy. That's a typo. That should say industrial. Should probably fix that right now. Okay, industrial. All right, economy based on free labor. So that was just something that they couldn't come to grips over, so they have to fight a civil war. So the South leaves the Union, all right, and so in order to preserve the Union, Abraham Lincoln goes to war against the South, against the Confederacy, to maintain or to preserve the Union. But then, by the end of the war, it becomes it's overshadowed. I mean, it's not just about preserving the Union; it's about abolishing slavery. Okay, so the United States was really late to that. And if you notice, it doesn't say this in the notes, but I just want to say this really quickly. He frees the slaves with the Emancipation Proclamation, which was an executive order. 2 years after Tsar Alexander abolishes serfdom, where he emancipates the serfs. So there's sort of some similarities there, okay, that, kind of weird or interesting that they happened so close to one another. All right. Let's look at question number 17 here. It says, how does the map help illustrate problems facing Austria after the revolutions of 1848? How did the Habsburg dynasty remedy those problems? What happened after the Austro-Prussian War? Okay, so obviously we can see that there are a lot of different ethnic groups there, so they could be considered a polyglot. They are an empire. The very definition of an empire is when you have a lot of different people controlled by one, or a lot of people, ethnic groups controlled by, one of those ethnic groups. And so the Germans only account for about 1/3 of, Austrians are Germans. So the Austrians, which are the Habsburgs, they're a minority in their own country. So there's no real clear-cut majority. There's all the different types of people, the Hungarians and the Czechs, and then some other Slavic people, some Italians as well. All right. So that's a problem, okay? And in the days of, this is when nationalism is really becoming a very popular movement. This is going to weaken them. Not just them, but it's going to also weaken the Ottoman. All right, so Austria is forced to create the dual monarchy with Austria-Hungary. All right, and they basically give them equality or political equality with the Austrians. So the Hungarians get like their own leader, but it's sort of, I don't know, it's a weird setup. But Austria, to maintain their control, they have to do this with Hungary. And then what the Hungarians promise them is for their equality, then they would help together tamp down any other nationalistic uprisings, like specifically from the Czechs. All right. And then moving on, it says, according to the passage above, what led Tsar Alexander II to begin reforming Russia? In addition to the one listed here, what additional reforms were implemented? How does this represent a turning point for Russia? Does the reality match the rosy outlook described above? Explain. Okay, so this is from Michael Lynch, historian, and it's entitled The Emancipation of the Russian Serfs, 1861, History Today, 2003. Okay, it says, coming to the throne in 1855 in the middle of the conflict that would be the Crimean War, Alexander II was unable to save Russia from military failure, but the humiliation convinced him that if his nation was to have stability and peace at home and be honored abroad, military and domestic reforms were vitally necessary. Okay, so I've said it before in class, reform needs to come from above, or most assuredly it will come from below. So he recognizes that his country needs to reform itself, otherwise they're going to have widespread revolutions. Okay, so he says the first step on that path would be the removal of serfdom, whose manifest inefficiency benefited neither lord, peasant, nor nation. So it's just not an efficient system of agriculture. It's what existed before the agricultural revolution that took place in Great Britain. So this is a very outdated, antiquated, obsolete way of producing goods, producing food, and it doesn't allow for proto-industrialization to take place. It just doesn't. All right. It says Alexander declared that Russia's defeat, the end of the war, marked a golden moment in the nation's history. Now was the hour that every Russian, under the protection of the law, could begin to enjoy the fruits of his own labors. So the reforms are really made, or become obviously needed because of their defeat, how bad their defeat was in the Crimean War. They just had such a difficult time trying to get soldiers to the front and equipping their soldiers as the war drug on. They ran low on equipment, weapons, things like that. So in addition to the emancipation of the serfs, he creates the zemstvos, which is a form of local government that the people have a say in. All right, and so this is a way to sort of make them feel like that they have a say in things. They have a voice, but only at the local level. All right, not that would be like being able to vote for your the mayor of your city, or we live in St. Charles County. That would be like you could vote for the county executive, but that would be the extent of it. You couldn't vote for a governor at the state level, and certainly couldn't vote for the president at the federal level. So the zemstvos would be just like local government. But it was better. It was a step in the right direction. It was better than what they had previously. And then the industrialization efforts are led by Sergei Witte through the construction of railroads, and then he uses a lot of foreign money to help fund the construction of railroads. And under him, they build the Trans-Siberian Railroad, which traverses some 5,000-6,000 miles. It's a like quite a feat that they complete. All right, so the numbers of years where the people would have to serve in the military or conscription was reduced from like 25 all the way down to 6. But the reform did not really, these reforms they weren't popular, even the emancipation of the serfs, because they had to pay for the land. So the serfs really felt like that they were sort of bogged down by a lot of debt that they had to, they had to pay off so that they could own their land outright. And so actually the emancipation of the serfs it sort of backfired. I don't know what to say it backfired, but it was not unpopular. I mean, it was not popular. Sorry. Anyway, that completes this. Hopefully that helps. I would encourage you to review review this video, and kind of have your study guide out hopefully you had your study guide out as I was going through this, and making any corrections or notes along the way. All right. Hope you guys have a great weekend. I'll make another video pretty soon. All right. See you. Bye.